Do you want to know the real reason why I love working in real estate? I've got a great real life story that I'd love to share with you. So I might not be the best storyteller, I'm certainly no Brandon Sanderson, my favorite author, but sit back and let me tell you about a recent experience that really makes it all seem worthwhile while I'm in this business. So in spring of 2023, I received a call from an allied partner of mine who said that they knew someone that was in a tight spot and needed to move. So immediately I had reached out to them to find out more and see what we could do to help. And when I did, I learned quickly a brief chunk of their story and knew it was something I needed to get involved with right then. So we set up a time to get together so I could learn a little bit more about them and we could come up with a plan together. So you see, this couple barely knew where to begin, but had tried numerous times to reach out to other realtors who had never bothered to return calls or didn't seem like they actually wanted to help or care about their situation. It was also a bit more challenging to them because they honestly weren't great with a lot of technology, and it didn't help that English was actually their second language. So when I learned of these struggles, I decided to ask my buddy Jose with Evertree Insurance if he'd mind coming along with me to help with some of the translations for some of the more difficult stuff for me to explain. Things like contract language, loan products, and it seemed like this was an issue they had previously had, so we wanted to make sure we got ahead of it. So we got together just a couple days later and sat down at the office. Once there, they told me the truth of their situation. So they had actually immigrated to the US in the early 2000s and were immediately working hard to gain their footing and their citizenship here. They ended up finding a solid job working steady in construction for many years and found a rental home in Southwest Detroit that they stayed at for basically the whole time they've been here. The big problem they had was that their landlord was a real piece of work. So for years while they lived there and took very nice care of the home, they were constantly being harassed by this landlord. Things like randomly threatening to evict them for no reason, constantly driving by the home and checking in on it, giving them no sense of privacy. They were asking about guests and controlling who could come in there, who could enjoy their living spaces or the exterior if they wanted to have a barbecue. They were complaining about the number of vehicles they owned or might have been on the property, and even went as so far to rip up their small flower garden bed in the front of the yard that they planted. The rent was constantly in a state of uncertainty. And while all this was going on already, they ran into some unfortunate health situations that made their life even more difficult. So they needed to do something so they could better take care of themselves and their family. I immediately felt determined to see this through for them. Unfortunately for them, they didn't have a big savings set up, especially since the medical issues started and it was costing them a lot of money. And they just couldn't figure out how it was even possible to do something like we were talking about. But that's when I told them about a great down payment assistance program we have that exists in our area. There's things such as Mishta and National Faith that could possibly help them out by offering up to $10,000 towards their down payment and their closing costs. So after finding out what features were most important about the house that they wanted to own and what areas they're most interested in, because they wanted to stay close to their family, I then connected them with one of my local lenders here in Southeast Michigan who I know specializes in these programs. As many of you know, we are in a heavy digital age right now. Almost everything is electronic, which for many people, it makes their lives easier. However, for these guys, as I mentioned, it was a bit of a challenge. But rather than giving up when they struggled to get what we needed, my lender actually physically met up with them in person for several hours to help make sure they got all the documents together that they needed so they could get their pre-approval and we could start this hunt. A short while later, I got a copy of their pre-approval in my hands. We were ready to go. Since technology wasn't their strong point in the beginning, this was one of those scenarios where I truly had to screen through properties individually to find the ones that I felt would be the best to look at in their area and in their price range. And we had to arrange a whole group of showings weekly that they often didn't see with their phones like many of you might be doing when you're browsing around. So it honestly took quite a while to find the right home. And with so few homes being available and how competitive, it was tough, but we didn't give up. By November, we finally had a home under contract to purchase. It was a beautifully remodeled ranch home with a full basement and attached garage. It was perfect for what they needed. Unfortunately, we ran into yet another hurdle. So after getting through all of the lending process and getting our loan fully approved to buy the house, we received news from the seller that they were having difficulty clearing the title. So extension after extension. We kept waiting until we finally got news that unfortunately it just wasn't going to be possible without a long, arduous court process for the seller. In hindsight, this is something that the seller probably should have been aware of before even listing the home, but it was not so. and we were at the wrong end of the stick. So now, here we are in mid-January of this year, 2024, and we're back to square one. The landlord was still on their ass. Once again, this took a little while to find that right home, because it had to meet these stricter needs that they had, and it had to be able to qualify for their loan type. But eventually we did it. So now a new home was under contract. And like the first, it was a recently renovated 3-bedroom ranch with a basement even closer to the area they wanted to be in, and for a significantly cheaper price than we originally had on that other one. So I always say that the right one will come along, and the ones that fall apart do so because they aren't the right one. In this case, it was an all-around improvement from the first one, and I felt this was 100% true to their statement. The seller and the listing agent on the other side were great to work with, and they were very accommodating as we needed to negotiate a few repairs to be completed in order to pass the code, especially for FHA inspection. So we had to go back through underwriting now and the whole entire loan process again. But this time we were more familiar with it and more confident that we could get to the finish line. And then we finally received the best news ever. We were officially clear to close. So during our final walkthrough, they were in complete denial and refused to believe that this was even happening. It was like that all the way through closing until everything was completely signed and I've got to finally hand them the keys to their new home. Their moods shifted so suddenly, so completely. I mean, you could just feel it in the room. It was amazing. Their anxiety just completely vanished and their faces lit up with joy like I've never seen. Literal tears were in their eyes because they immediately began to realize how their life would change. So that meant a lot to me. They could do whatever they wanted to their house now and make it feel welcoming to them and their guests. Their sister could come visit anytime they wanted. They could finally bring their dog home after having to live with other family members for a long time. Almost an entire year after this journey started, they could control their life again. It was beautiful. It was one of the absolute greatest feelings in the world to know that you helped somebody make that big of a change in their life. And now they're ready to enjoy the rest of their days in this forever home of theirs. And they're gonna leave a legacy with them behind. This is why I love doing this.